Nick, the Emergencies Act inquiry just wrapped up, and we kind of saw Freedom Convoy organizers, I guess, re-prosecuting their case. They were getting a lot of headlines again. Now, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre was an early supporter of the Freedom Convoy, and I'm curious if this had any impact on his party's support.
What's clear is that this whole inquiry has been a big political hot potato, right? For the conservatives, for the liberals, for the police, for governments and stuff like that. It's interesting. We track every week ballot support for all of the major parties. And we can see right now in the latest Nanos tracking that the liberals are at 31, conservatives at 30. So basically a statistical tie between the two front-running parties. But look at the 4-week change. You can see that the conservatives are down 4 points or thereabouts. The liberals down 1. NDP up 6. Maybe this inquiry is about kind of none of the above, where people look at the liberals and the conservatives and go, all right, the liberals didn't do a great job at managing this, so there are lots of issues. And then for people that were looking at the conservatives and Pierre Poilievre, that they remembered his support for the truckers' convoy. So maybe one of the key takeaways here is that for Pierre Poilievre, when he was focused on meat and potatoes issues like the cost of living, his numbers were good. Connection to the convoy, not so good in terms of the big national strategy.
Oh, we did see an increase when he was hammering the prime minister about cost of living issues in question periods. So that's interesting. I mean, that's really what's speaking to most Canadians, I suppose.
Yeah, I think the video, was he holding toast and bacon or
Yeah,
toast?
no,
I don't know.
yeah.
The YouTube video that got boatloads of eyeballs. He's built a brand. Part of his brand, and there are a number of elements to it. Part of his brand relates to him being worried and concerned about the rising cost of living and people just paying the bills. Another part of his brand has to do with his past support of the truckers' freedom convoy, and it looks like one definitely plays well among Canadians. The other one a little more of a mixed bag. Good for the conservative base, especially the base that put him into power as the leader of the Conservatives. Perhaps not good for a growth strategy.
Nick, we also saw Prime Minister Justin Trudeau testify at the hearings on the final day of the hearings, and I guess some may have wondered if there was any political risk to that, but according to your ballot tracking, it doesn't seem to be the case.
Yeah, no negative fallout, at least yet, for Trudeau. And the fact of the matter is, he showed up. He testified. I don't think people can complain about the Liberals not being engaged on this inquiry, which had to take place. It has to take place whenever the Emergency Act is invoked. So there's no discretion on the part of the government as to whether this inquiry exists or its participation in the inquiry. I think for those that watched it, generally thought that the Prime Minister did a reasonably good job at answering questions. But the fact of the matter is, most people already have a formed opinion about Justin Trudeau. They either like, and I think it's polarized. I think people either like or don't like Justin Trudeau. And I'm not sure that this moved the dial either in his favor or against him based on his performance at the inquiry itself.
Nick, on the subject of ballot tracking, I want to talk about a party that we haven't discussed in a long time, the Green Party. So while all this was happening, the Green Party, they've been sort of in the political wilderness for a while now. They have new leaders, co-leaders. There's Elizabeth May, familiar face, of course, and the former journalist and human rights activist Jonathan Pedneau. I'm curious what you make of this and where their numbers are right now.
Well, it's kind of like a 2-for-1 deal, right? For the Green Party. Like, if you think one leader's not enough, let's have 2 co-leaders.
Why not?
And it's retro hour. Elizabeth May is back, right? She was, she's one of the key individuals that kind of led a renewed Green Party that really wasn't a big factor on the Canadian political landscape until she arrived. She took a step back after the election and her performance in the last election, and it looks like it's what's a movie? I think, is it The Godfather? Like, every time I go out, they try to pull me back in. I think that's what's happening with the Green Party, where for some individuals, especially within the Green Party, they saw her as a safe alternative, and she gets to add Jonathan Pedneau as the new twist on the old leadership. What's interesting is nationally they're at around 5% in the weekly tracking. But Michael, let's check out the long-term trend or the longer-term trend on the proportion of Canadians that would consider voting for the Green Party. And what we're seeing right now is a trend line that goes back to 2015. So it's 7 years ago, this in 2015 November. What we can see at least is right now, a little less than 30% of Canadians would consider voting for the Green Party. But when you look at that trend line, it's usually in the mid-30s. So it's a little lower than it has been. And then you can see that one spike. There's one spike that goes way down, like a negative spike, goes down to 20%. That was when they had the real big kerfuffle. Like I'll call it the green, I don't know what we want to call it. The green messiness, big green mess. When there was a disagreement on the national executive, Annamie Paul was basically cut off at the knees, and there was lots of internal bickering. That was actually the low point for the proportion of Canadians that would consider voting Green at 20%. So better than it was at that low point, but still not where it has been traditionally. So there's still a bit of rebuilding that has to take place for the Green Party.
I was going to say it ain't easy being green, but the green messiness is better. I like that better.
Yeah, the big green mess. Yeah.
I'm just fascinated by this because, with your own issue tracking, Canadians routinely rank the environment as, I don't know, top 3, let's say. And there's more attention on environmental issues than ever before, and the Green Party just seemed to have this big implosion. But maybe May and Pedno will be able to bring some more stability to the party and engage Canadians yet again. Anyway, we'll see what happens in the next year.
Absolutely. You know what? If the Greens, the narrative has been the Greens have been divided, right? Annamie Paul being the best example, her relationship with the National Council. I think we should call it the fiasco of the Green national election campaign in the last federal election, where they didn't give their federal leader any resources. The federal leader for all infects basically campaigned in her own riding, trying to win that. So the Greens have to start off. The first part of the narrative has to be that they're united, and I think that's what Elizabeth May and Jonathan Pedno have to do. They have to send a narrative to say, let's put everything behind us. We're now united, and they're going to focus on issues such as the environment and put that environmental lens on the big picture in order to advance environmental issues and to rebuild the Green Party of Canada.
Nick, I want to go over to our friends out west in Alberta and talk about Danielle Smith, the new premier. So she campaigned, on a promise of standing up for Alberta within federal Canada. And this week she launched a new bill. I'm going to have to read this. Pardon me, because it's a long one. The oh my gosh, what is it? The Alberta Sovereignty Within a United Canada Act. It's a bit of a mouthful, but essentially it's a bill where if there's federal regulations and federal legislation that is not necessarily in Alberta's best interest, they may be able to ignore it.
Canada's provinces and territories are part of a larger whole, but are not subordinate to it. As Albertans, we love our Canada deeply. This is our home, and we are honored to be contributing members. But the way Ottawa has treated the province, most especially Alberta, is unacceptable. Albertans are demanding action to restore a relationship that respects Alberta's sovereign areas of provincial jurisdiction as defined by the Constitution.
I'm fascinated by this. If there's support for this beyond Smith's main core of support, and if Albertans in general agree to this sort of thing.
Well, first of all, it's always good provincial politics, whether it doesn't matter what province you're from, to beat up and gripe and take swipes at the government in Ottawa. So we shouldn't really be surprised, and it's a very storied tradition in Canadian politics. But what we're seeing with the Premier of Alberta is that she's taking it to a new level. We also know from the polling that when we talk to individuals in the West, that the word they're most likely to use to describe how they feel about the government in Ottawa is anger. So People are angry in the West. They're angry at Ottawa. They feel that the Federation is not working. But this is kind of, what's odd about this whole thing, this new act that gives powers specifically to the cabinet on a lot of on federal issues and allows Alberta to chart its own course. It's kind of like, yeah, we're still living in the house, but you know what? Lunch is no longer at 12 o'clock. We might not want to have lunch at 12. We'd like to have lunch at 2 instead. Or, you know what? When the power bill comes in, maybe we don't want to pay that, or we want to pay less. Or, you know what? We think we should, we're not being recognized. So it's going to inherently lead to conflict between the federal government and the province of Alberta. The big question is, here's the big question: will there be copycats? Will the government of Saskatchewan adopt something? And you know what? If a second province adopts a similar strategy, then I think the federal government really has to worry to kind of contain what could be a new contagion in the Federation that could be a fundamental game changer. And how about this? Why don't I throw out, since the holiday season will be upon us and is upon us, why don't I throw out one piece of good news, that perhaps this legislation forces the provinces and the federal government to talk about a renewal of the Federation and how it works. Because I think that's basically what the government of Alberta is trying to say. They're trying to say, we're not happy. We need to change things. And this is, I would say, this could be a first opening political gambit to have a discussion on how the Federation needs to be renewed. So how's that? So we can have doom and gloom, or maybe a little bit of Federation sunshine.
I admire your optimism on this. I'm hopeful too. You made me hopeful, Nick. That's good.
Well, there we go.
Sticking with Alberta and Premier Smith, she's come out against school mask mandates. And this is at a time when Alberta, like much of Canada, is dealing with a lot of seasonal illnesses like the flu, COVID, RSV, etc. I'm curious because you've done previous polling on how Canadians feel about masking, and I'm just wondering again if this is something Smith is doing that might appeal to people beyond her core supporters or not.
Well, I think this is very good for fundraising for the United Conservative Party in Alberta, because it strikes a chord. Any kind of, what I'll say, heavy-handed government intervention, as long as there's not a major outbreak, I think the government will be okay. The provincial government will be okay as long as there's not a significant outbreak, as long as there isn't a narrative emerging that people are dying as a result of lack of wearing masks, and they'll probably be okay. And the thing is, we look at the numbers. When we ask Canadians the top unprompted national issue of concern, we're still tracking coronavirus, because if somebody says coronavirus, we would say we report that. But it's now like not 1%. It's like a 0.1%. Normally, we wouldn't even report on anything like this, but we do report it because it's actually important that regardless of what we see in the news about, young kids and respiratory issues that they're having, news about whether there should be masking in schools, the fact of the matter is that for average Canadians, coronavirus, the pandemic, at least in this particular case, is not on the agenda. They're actually more likely to be worried about healthcare and whether the healthcare system is functioning and people can access a doctor and stuff like that.
Nick, we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we'll look at the strain on our hospitals. Nick, so we're seeing a lot of reports about hospitals in Canada, especially emergency rooms, under immense strain because of this spike in cases of flu, COVID, RSV. I'm curious where healthcare stands now as an issue for Canadians.
It's on the rise. Check out the 4-week change on top unprompted national issue concern in the Nanos tracking. Healthcare at the top of the list, 16%, up a full 3 percentage points in the last four weeks. Inflation at 15, up 2. Jobs at 15, down 4. Environment at 13, up 2. not a lot of focus on the pandemic with coronavirus at 0.1. But what we are seeing is that an increasing number of Canadians are focused on healthcare as their top unprompted national concern. It's what they're worried about, increasingly worried about right now.
Now, in Ontario, at least, there's a lot of sort of public anger, I suppose, at the handling of our healthcare system. How did it get like this? Why is it under such strain? And I know that the Ontario Health Minister had to come out and say that it's not a way to push us towards privatization. There are long-term solutions that she's working on. I'm curious, like, who do Canadians blame for when our healthcare system comes under strain? Is it a federal thing? Is it the provincial government?
Oh, they're blaming everyone. How's that?
Everyone.
Yeah, it's kind of it's one of those things where, the reality is that provinces deliver healthcare as part of their constitutional mandate, but the federal government plays a significant role in funding healthcare. So, and the thing is what we see is what we know from the polling is that there's been consistent support for publicly funded healthcare across Canada and consistently over time. It's kind of like part of our identity, and people always get a little nervous when there's anything kind of American style. And privatized healthcare is probably at the top of the list, which is why governments tread in Canada very carefully on when it comes to any perception of privatizing healthcare services, because they know that it can be a very risky strategy depending on what they say. So I'm not surprised that the Ford government is soft pedaling anything related to, I'll call it the P word, privatization, and connecting that to changes in the healthcare system.
And it was only just a few weeks ago, I think, that all the provincial health ministers in the federal government got in a room together, and they were trying to figure out a new healthcare funding deal. The provinces would like more money for healthcare, and they didn't get anywhere. I mean, this seems like an issue that's only going to get worse in the next year.
Well, they didn't get anywhere because I'm not sure how much fiscal room the federal government has to give more money, and as a result, the Trudeau government hasn't been hot about engaging the premiers on healthcare and increasing the level of federal transfers. And you have to remember in this context that some provinces have surpluses. So it's kind of like, what's up with that? You've got a surplus. The federal government still has a significant deficit, and if from the federal perspective, if a provincial government has a surplus and it believes that it needs more money for healthcare, that perhaps because provinces also help fund provincial healthcare, that perhaps they should just be taking some of those surpluses and not necessarily delivering things like tax breaks and tax cuts to citizens in their province. So that, I think there's validity on both sides when it comes to the funding argument.
And do you see this as becoming more of a political risk for the federal government as we move along, or do you think this is just sort of a political issue that's been going since I guess for decades, and there's no end to it?
Well, the big question is this a bigger crisis than we have seen in the past? And I think what worries Canadians, regardless of what part of the country that they live in, is, when emergency rooms close, when they can't find a family doctor or have a general practitioner, and then they have to go into either emergency or to clinics, that it creates a high level of anxiety that the healthcare services that people want might not be there. That said, I'm not sure that Canadians are convinced that spending more money is the solution. But we do know from research that's been done in the past that making sure that hospitals are staffed well, making sure that we have enough physicians in the province, and that our post-secondary education system creates the nurses and the physicians that we need, are probably top priorities. But the challenge with that is it's not a spigot. You can't just turn a spigot on and all of a sudden have more general practitioners available for Canadians. It takes time to create these folks. And I think the other thing we have to worry are physicians who, for their own frustration or for whatever reason, decide to leave, and nurses decide to leave Canada and go to the United States and to be in that other system.
Well, Nick, there's a lot more to get into on this very complex issue, and I know in the new year, I think we'll have a special episode just on healthcare, taking a deeper dive at it. Nick, I think that's it for this episode, though. So as always, thank you very much.
You too. Bye-bye.